When you first start gardening, even the smallest harvest can feel like a major success. A few basil leaves, one tomato, a handful of greens from a small container. At the beginning, that is enough to make you feel like the whole garden is working. But after a few seasons, you start to notice how much effort annual gardening really takes. Every year, the old plants have to be removed. The beds need to be cleared. The soil needs to be refreshed. Seeds have to be started again. Seedlings have to be transplanted again. And the same cycle begins from zero. There is nothing wrong with that. Annual vegetables are productive, flexible, and very useful in any food garden. But if your entire garden depends only on annual crops, you are always rebuilding the system. Perennial crops work differently. These are plants you establish once, then harvest from for several years. Some can produce for a decade, others can keep going for 15, 20, or even longer when they are grown in the right climate and cared for properly. That does not mean they need no care at all. They still need good soil, water, space, pruning, dividing, or seasonal maintenance depending on the crop. But the biggest advantage is this: you do not have to start from nothing every single year. In this video, we will look at 7 perennial crops that can make a garden more stable, more productive, and easier to maintain over time. The first perennial crop worth planting is asparagus. If you want a vegetable that rewards patience, asparagus is one of the best examples in the garden. A well-established asparagus bed can keep producing for 15 to 20 years, and in good conditions, sometimes even longer. That is why asparagus should not be treated like a quick seasonal crop. It is more like a long-term investment. You can grow asparagus from seed, from young seedlings, or from crowns. Crowns are the most common choice because they give you a faster start. A crown is basically the root system of a young asparagus plant, and once it is planted, its job is to build strength underground. That underground structure is the secret to the whole crop. In the first year, the plant may send up a few thin spears. It can be tempting to cut them, especially if you have been waiting to taste your first homegrown asparagus. But harvesting too early weakens the plant before it has built enough energy. For the first 1 or 2 years, the best strategy is restraint. Let most of the spears grow tall and open into feathery green foliage. These are often called asparagus ferns. They are not just decorative. They are the solar panels of the plant. Through photosynthesis, those fern-like stems collect energy from sunlight and send it back down into the crowns and roots. The stronger the root system becomes, the more spears the plant can produce in later seasons. By the 3rd year, the asparagus bed is usually strong enough for a more serious harvest. At that point, you can begin cutting spears when they are young, tender, and around 6 to 8 inches tall. A sharp knife can be used near soil level, or the spears can be snapped by hand where they naturally break. Once the harvest window ends, the remaining spears should be allowed to grow back into ferns again, so the plant can recharge for the following year. Asparagus also prefers a permanent space. Because it can stay in the ground for decades, choose the planting location carefully. The soil should drain well, because asparagus crowns do not like sitting in water. Adding compost before planting helps create a fertile bed. And a layer of mulch can reduce weeds and keep soil moisture more even. Spacing also matters. Asparagus is usually planted in rows or patches, not as one lonely plant. A small group will give a much better harvest over time. As the ferns grow taller, they may lean or flop, especially in wind or rain. That does not usually harm the plant, but it can make the bed look messy. A simple support frame, twine, or garden stakes can keep the foliage upright until it naturally dies back at the end of the season. The main lesson with asparagus is simple. Do not rush it. Give it a few years to establish, feed the soil, let the ferns do their work. And the reward is a perennial vegetable bed that can produce fresh spring spears for many years without being replanted from scratch. The next perennial crop is rhubarb. Rhubarb is one of those plants that confuses people a little, because in the kitchen it is often treated like a fruit, but in the garden it grows like a hardy perennial vegetable. Most people know it from desserts: rhubarb pie, strawberry rhubarb pie, rhubarb jam, compote, or sauce. Its flavor is sharp, tart, and bright, which is why it is so often paired with sugar or sweet fruit. On its own, the stalk can be extremely sour, but cooked down with the right ingredients, it becomes one of the most useful perennial crops for preserves and baking. Traditionally, rhubarb grows best in cool climates. It likes cold winters, moderate summers, and soil that stays evenly moist without becoming waterlogged. But that does not mean every warm climate gardener has to give up on it. Some varieties, such as Victoria, are known for handling a wider range of conditions than many of the deep red classic types. Victoria rhubarb is often greener in color, so it may not have that dramatic ruby red look people expect. But the stalks can still have excellent flavor. In a hotter garden, placement becomes very important. Rhubarb does not enjoy intense afternoon heat. If your summers are harsh, give it morning sun and afternoon shade, or plant it where taller crops, fruit trees, or ornamental plants can protect it during the hottest part of the day. Even with good placement, very high temperatures can stress the leaves. Some leaves may wilt, scorch, or die back during extreme heat. But the crown can often survive if the roots are healthy and the plant is not allowed to dry out completely. Once established, rhubarb can live for many years. A healthy plant may stay productive for around 10 years, and sometimes longer, especially if it is divided when the crown becomes crowded. Harvesting rhubarb is also different from harvesting many other crops. Instead of cutting the stalks with pruners, it is often better to grab a mature stalk near the base and pull it gently to the side. The stalk should release cleanly from the crown. This method removes the full stalk without leaving a cut stub that may rot. After harvesting, trim off the leaf and keep only the stalk. This part is important. Rhubarb leaves should not be eaten. They contain high levels of oxalic acid and other compounds that can be toxic in large amounts. The edible part is the stalk, not the leaf. The stalks can be chopped and used fresh or frozen until you have enough for a pie, jam, or sauce. With the right variety, the right shade, and a little patience, rhubarb can become one of the easiest perennial crops in the garden. You plant the crown, keep it comfortable, harvest the stalks, and year after year, it comes back with that same tart flavor that makes spring and early summer desserts so memorable. The third perennial option is not a vegetable in the traditional sense, but it may be one of the most rewarding things you can grow: fruit trees. Many people assume they need a large backyard to grow fruit, but that is not always true. With the right varieties, even a small patio, balcony, rooftop, or deck can become a mini orchard. The key is choosing trees that are naturally compact, grafted onto dwarfing rootstock, or bred to grow in a narrow shape. That is why dwarf peaches, compact figs, and columnar apples can work so well in containers. A dwarf peach can stay much smaller than a standard peach tree while still producing full-sized fruit. A columnar apple grows mostly upward instead of spreading wide, which makes it useful in tight spaces. A cold hardy fig, such as Chicago hardy, can also be a strong choice for container growers in cooler regions, as long as winter protection is handled correctly. Pollination is one detail you cannot ignore. Some fruit trees are self-fertile, meaning one tree can set fruit on its own. Many figs and some peaches fall into this category. But many apple trees need cross-pollination from another compatible apple variety blooming at the same time, without that second variety nearby. The tree may flower beautifully but produce little or no fruit. Sunlight is another major factor. Most fruit trees need full sun, usually at least 6 to 8 hours of direct light each day. Without enough sun, the tree may survive, but fruit production will be weak. Container fruit trees also need more attention than trees planted in the ground. In the ground, roots can spread out to search for water and nutrients. In a pot, the root system is limited. During hot weather, the soil can dry out quickly, especially on a deck or rooftop where heat reflects from hard surfaces. In the warmest part of the season, a container fruit tree may need water every day. Fertilizing is also more important in pots. Every time you water, some nutrients can wash out through the drainage holes. A balanced, slow-release or all-purpose fertilizer used during the growing season can help support healthy leaves, flowers, and fruit. The exact schedule depends on the tree, the potting mix, and the climate. But container trees generally need a more consistent feeding routine than trees in open soil. Winter is the part many new growers underestimate. A tree in a pot is more exposed to cold than the same tree planted in the ground because the roots are not insulated by a large mass of soil. A good rule is to choose a tree rated at least 1 to 2 hardiness zones colder than your actual growing zone if it will stay outside in a container. For example, if your area is zone 6, a container tree rated to zone 4 is a safer choice than one rated only to zone 6. You can also protect the pot by moving it near a wall, wrapping the container, grouping pots together, or storing the tree in an unheated but sheltered place during the coldest part of winter. Fruit trees take longer than leafy greens or herbs, but they change the way a small garden feels. Instead of planting everything again each season, you are building a living structure that can grow with you. With enough sun, the right variety, proper watering, and winter protection, even a small container garden can produce real fruit year after year. The fourth perennial crop is tree collard, also known as tree kale or walking stick kale. This is one of the most useful perennial greens you can grow if your climate is mild enough to support it. And like ordinary kale, which is usually grown as an annual or biennial crop, tree collard can live for several years, in the right conditions. A healthy plant may keep producing leaves for many seasons without needing to be replanted every year. The plant grows upright, almost like a small shrub. Instead of forming one lower set close to the ground, it develops a woody stem with leafy shoots growing along the sides and toward the top. Over time, a mature plant can become tall, branching, and surprisingly productive. The leaves are used much like kale or collard greens. You can cook them in soups, stews, stir-fries, or sautés. You can also use younger, tender leaves raw, especially when the weather is cool and the texture is softer. Like many brassicas, tree collard tastes best in cooler conditions. During hot weather, the leaves can become tougher, stronger, and more bitter, but when the temperature drops, the flavor often improves. Cool weather can make the leaves taste sweeter, milder, and more pleasant. That is one reason this crop is so valuable. When many warm season vegetables are slowing down, a perennial leafy green like tree collard can continue giving you harvests. Another advantage is that you do not need to harvest the whole plant. You can pick individual leaves as needed, leaving the growing tips and enough foliage behind so the plant can keep producing. This cut and come again style makes it very practical for home gardens, especially if you cook grains regularly. However, tree collard has one challenge: it is not always easy to find. Many types do not reliably produce seed, so they are often shared and propagated through cuttings. That means gardeners usually get a plant from another grower, a nursery, or a specialty source rather than growing it from a seed packet. Fortunately, propagation is simple once you have access to a healthy plant. Choose a tender, flexible stem section that is not too old and woody. Cut it cleanly. Remove most of the leaves so the cutting does not lose too much moisture, and place it into a pot of moist soil. Keep the soil damp but not waterlogged. With time, the cutting can form roots and become a new plant. This makes tree collard especially useful for gardeners who like low-cost, long-term crops. One strong plant can produce many side shoots. Those shoots can become harvests, and some can become cuttings for future plants. Tree collard is not the flashiest crop in the garden. It does not give you big fruit or dramatic harvest baskets all at once. But it gives something even more valuable: steady, reliable greens over a long period of time. If you want a perennial vegetable that can quietly support your kitchen year after year, tree collard is absolutely worth looking for. The fifth perennial crop is artichoke. At first glance, artichoke almost looks like something from another age. The plant can become large, silver green, architectural, and dramatic, which makes it useful not only as food but also as a landscape plant. In the right climate, artichoke is a true perennial. It grows especially well in mild regions with cool, wet winters and warm, dry summers, similar to a Mediterranean climate. In colder areas, many gardeners still grow it as an annual. But where winters are not too harsh, the plant can return year after year from its crown. The part we eat is the open flower bud. If the bud is harvested while it is still tight and tender, it becomes the artichoke you know from the kitchen. But if you leave it on the plant too long, it will open into a large purple thistle-like flower. That flower is beautiful for pollinators, but it is past the best stage for eating. Artichoke also expands over time. A mature plant can send up side shoots, often called offshoots or pups, or on the main crown. These can help the patch become larger. And they can also be divided and replanted if you want to create more plants. You can start artichokes from seed, but many gardeners prefer transplants because they save time in suitable climates. Planting young artichokes in fall can give them time to establish roots before the main spring harvest. The harvest season depends heavily on climate. In many mild areas, spring is the main season for artichokes. And warmer regions, the plant may also produce a second smaller crop in fall. During hot or dry periods, the plant may slow down, look rough, or partially die back, then return when conditions improve. That seasonal rhythm creates an interesting opportunity in the garden. Because artichokes can have periods when they are not at their full size, the spacer on them can be used creatively. While the artichoke is smaller or resting, you can grow short-season flowers, herbs, or ornamental plants nearby. Then, when the artichoke returns to full growth, it becomes the main feature again. This makes artichoke valuable in two ways. It is productive, but it is also beautiful. The large leaves create structure, the buds provide food, and if you allow a few flowers to open, they can attract bees and other pollinators. However, artichokes do need space. A mature plant can become wide and heavy, so it should not be squeezed into a tiny corner. It also prefers well-drained soil and consistent moisture during active growth. Mulch can help keep the root zone cooler and reduce water stress. Once established, an artichoke patch can become one of the most impressive perennial features in a food garden. It gives you edible flower buds, strong visual impact, and a crop that can return season after season without being replanted from scratch. The sixth perennial crop is scarlet runner bean. This one surprises many gardeners because most people think of beans as annual plants. You sow them, they climb, they flower, they produce pods, and then the season ends. But scarlet runner bean is different. In the right conditions, it can behave as a short-lived perennial. That means the top growth may die back, but the plant can survive underground and return when the weather warms again. The reason is its root system. Scarlet runner bean can form thick, tuber-like roots beneath the soil. These roots store energy for the plant when cold weather damages or kills the vines above ground. The underground structure may remain alive, and, in spring, if the soil has not stayed too wet or frozen too deeply, the plant can send up new shoots. This is one reason scarlet runner bean has been grown successfully in cooler, higher elevation areas compared with many common beans. It is more tolerant of cool conditions than typical snap beans or common pole beans, though it still needs warmth to grow strongly and produce well. The flowers are another reason people love this plant. Scarlet runner bean produces bright red blossoms that are attractive in the garden and can draw in pollinators such as bees and hummingbirds where they are present. It can be grown on a trellis, arch, fence, or any strong vertical support, making it both edible and ornamental. The pods can be harvested young and cooked like green beans. If you leave the pods to mature, the large seeds can be dried and cooked later like shelling beans. The roots are also technically edible, but they are not usually the main reason to grow the plant. Most gardeners value scarlet runner beans for the flowers, pods, seeds, and climbing growth. The challenge is overwintering. Scarlet runner bean does not become perennial everywhere. In wet soil, the tuber-like roots can rot before spring. In very cold climates, they may not survive the winter at all unless they are protected. Even in mild regions, success can vary from year to year depending on drainage, temperature, and winter rainfall. So the safest way to think about this plant is flexible. Grow it as an annual if your climate is too cold or wet. But if you live in a mild area with well-drained soil, you can experiment with leaving the roots in the ground after the vines die back. Add mulch for protection, avoid disturbing the crown, and watch for new shoots when spring returns. Scarlet runner bean may not be as dependable as asparagus or rhubarb as a perennial crop, but it offers something unique. It is beautiful, productive, and capable of returning from below the soil when conditions are right. For a gardener who likes edible plants that also look good on a trellis, this is one crop worth trying. The final perennial crop is Jerusalem artichoke, also called sunchoke. And the first thing to know is that the name is misleading. Jerusalem artichoke does not come from Jerusalem, and it is not a true artichoke. It is actually a species of sunflower in the genus Helianthus. That relationship makes sense once you see the plant growing, because it can become tall, vigorous, and topped with small yellow sunflower-like blooms. But the flowers are not the main harvest. The real crop is underground. Sunchokes produce knobby tubers beneath the soil, and those tubers are the part you eat. They can be roasted, sautéed, boiled into soups, or sliced thin and fried until crisp. When cooked well, they can have a nutty, slightly sweet flavor, with a texture somewhere between a potato and a water chestnut. This plant is extremely productive, but that strength comes with a warning. Sunchokes spread very easily. If even a small tuber is left behind in loose garden soil, it can grow into a new plant the following season. That means a small planting can quickly turn into a permanent patch for some gardeners. That is a benefit. For others, it becomes a problem. So if you want to grow Jerusalem artichoke, think carefully about containment. A raised bed is a good option. A large container can work too. You can also plant it in a dedicated area where spreading will not interfere with other crops. What you should avoid is casually planting it in the middle of a mixed vegetable bed and assuming it will stay exactly where you put it. It probably will not. The best time to harvest is usually after the foliage begins to die back, in many climates. The flavor improves after cool weather because some of the stored carbohydrates shift in taste and texture. Why? You can dig the tubers as needed, but remember, if you want to remove the patch completely, you need to harvest carefully and avoid leaving pieces behind. There is one more important thing to know before eating a large plate of sunchokes. They are rich in inulin, a type of prebiotic fiber. Inulin can be beneficial for gut bacteria, but it can also cause gas and bloating for some people, especially if they eat too much at once. That is why sunchokes have a funny reputation among gardeners. The smart approach is to start with a small serving and see how your body reacts. Cooking them thoroughly may also make them easier to tolerate. Jerusalem artichoke is not the neatest perennial crop. It is vigorous, spreading, and a little wild. But if you manage it properly, it can give you a dependable underground harvest year after year with very little effort. For a garden designed around long-term food production, that makes sunchoke one of the most powerful perennial crops you can grow.